For a little bit, it seemed quaint, a fresh start from the past scars. My wife would have loved it here, I would say. The kids would have loved this backyard, I would smile through my grief. This place couldn't possibly burn down, I said to myself as the nightmares began creeping on again every night. We could have been happy here. As if that was a possibility anymore. I like to think I wasn't running. This wasn't the place I had fled to in desperation. This was the place where I would make a new life. I wasn't hiding here, I was living here. I wasn't cowering from people within this isolation. I would come out, I would start a new life, start a new family. That's what they would have wanted. I wouldn't let their deaths keep me from living. This is what I told myself for several months. But I never stopped seeing their faces, never woke up without feeling the weight of my bed shift as my non-existent wife stirred next to me, never went to the kitchen in the cold early morning without hearing the sound of clanking bowls and laughing children. The sickened wind of the rotting wood surrounding me seemed to carry the sounds of my distant neighborhood. The groaning of the decaying house structure sounded like small feet scampering on the waterlogged floor. Every day I felt sicker. Every day I felt more alone. Every day I began to be unable to hold back the tears. I was slowly falling apart in this isolation. My family nothing but tainted, delusive memories as I rotted away. I never turned the lights on. They were far too yellowed and dim to matter anyway. During the day, the decayed sunlight struggled through the surrounding trees and cast faint rays of light into the house, illuminating the dank and dreary interior, countless dust motes making the image appear dull, brown, and unfocused. I rarely ever ate. Cooking required more energy than I had. The dry cereal boxes began to pile up in the corner of my kitchen, probably becoming homes for countless spiders and insects, but I didn't care. I didn't care about anything. I thought this would continue forever, this state of perpetual self-loathing. I thought I would slowly waste away in isolated loneliness until I simply ceased to exist. I imagined myself evaporating into the oppressive musk within the walls of this shambled house. If only it had worked out like that. Walking back from the TV room one night after having fallen asleep on the couch for some time, I glanced at a clock to see it was well past midnight. From the second I had woken up this particular night, everything felt off. I felt cold, paranoid, and nervous. For the first time since I had moved here, I felt as though something else was in the house, something real and tangible, something moving. The grandfather clock ticked its low rumble as I walked down the narrow hallway to my bedroom, but I could faintly make out another sound as well. It sounded as if something was dragging itself along the carpet. Upon reaching my bedroom, my feet froze in the doorway, my heart descending in my chest. The room appeared wrong in a way I couldn't quite place, as if everything within was shifted slightly out of alignment, or the lighting was casting shadows at unnatural angles. I almost stepped inside to investigate further, but that's when I saw it. Something was underneath the covers of my bed. From the size and shape of the bulge, it looked human, but the proportions were off, as if its limbs were gangly and elongated. My heart dropped like a weight and my veins prickled with ice as my breath stopped short. I must have stood, frozen like that for several heart-pounding minutes as I watched this ghastly figure lie utterly motionless. Everything was stagnant. I was horrifically aware of how out of place my breathing was, and I tried desperately to keep my limbs from shaking. The thought never once crossed my mind that my covers were perhaps just ruffled in a way that made it look as though something was beneath them. This wasn't an illusion. I wasn't being paranoid. I could feel, I could sense a kind of sickness leaking out of the room. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew that at any second the thing would throw the covers from itself. The last thing I would see would be its unhinged jaw as it covered the distance between the bed and me with 2 steps of its horrifically long legs. But it didn't move. I couldn't for sure assert that the covers were rising up and down as if it was breathing, but they certainly seemed to shift in the dim light. I waited for God knows how long, only ever tearing my eyes from the bed to steal a glance behind me into the tainted darkness of my house to be sure nothing was coming from behind. The only problem in doing this was that something was. I began to hear the telltale sound of something being dragged along the carpet. It was agonizingly slow, quiet, and distant at first, but it was growing closer, and I began to hear the pace picking up. At a point, it suddenly shifted from a dragging sound to a shuffling sprint. I could hear it careening towards me now at a full run, and my heart lurched violently, my hands splaying out in sheer terror as I stepped further into my bedroom and it rounded the corner into the hallway. Except it didn't. Nothing came around the corner. The sound simply stopped dead. The dark, empty hallway stared at me. Then something faintly rustled from inside my room. The sound caused me to instantly snap my neck around to glance back to the bed. It was an act that caused my lungs to go flat and any oxygen within me to evaporate to nothing. My wife's face. It was looking at me through eyes of piercing intensity. They were dull and lifeless, and yet there was a sort of brilliance within its sick, electric blue irises and small pinprick pupils defined enough to make me feel as if they were drilling into me. Her mangled head had emerged from the covers, skin gray and taut around the decaying skeletal form. Her ghastly pale lips had parted in a smile that had been carved into her face. The figure beneath the covers was still the horrible, gangly mess of stretched limbs, but this head, with decaying teeth showing through that wide smile, was far more horrific than whatever it could possibly be attached to. I stumbled back into the hallway, and although its head didn't move, its gaze seemed to follow me as if it were a 2-dimensional cutout staring directly into the camera. The second my foot hit the ground outside the threshold of the door frame, from around the hallway corner, I heard something shuffle rapidly. Lifting my foot up again in a panic and gripping the doorframe for support, the sound stopped again, and I suddenly heard it recede back into the depths of the house. My heart was hammering and my head throbbed with the pulsing blood in my ears. I was certain I would hear something rushing back at any moment, tearing around the corner with those hideous limbs outstretched. But nothing did. I turned back to the room and stared back at my wife's face, knowing that at any second the ghastly smile would rupture into an unhinged cavern to swallow me as it lurched forwards. But it didn't. It stayed utterly motionless. Not even a shimmer of light danced within its hollow eyes. I waited for nearly an hour in the threshold between my room and the hallway, unable to bring myself to stop shaking. The stagnant air of the house grew heavy with the consuming stillness of everything around me, and the more I stared at the horrid imitation of my wife's once beautiful face, the less the mangled jaw unnerved me, the less fear I felt in feeling its piercing dead eyes stab at my skin, the less I began to care. Then, slowly, I began to lose my sight, or rather, reality was no longer clear. The lines of the room became less defined, the positions and colors of the dim objects within no longer making sense within my decaying frame of vision. One thing remained perfectly and utterly defined, however, growing sharper if anything. Its face. And the more reality smudged away, the less horrific it became. The more the mangled and rotted teeth whitened into a perfect smile, the fleshy strand snagged in its mouth melting away from my vision. Soon, I couldn't even distinguish the horrid creature that was sure to be lurking under the covers, and all I could see was the face smiling at me. My feet melted forward slowly, my knees becoming mush as I watched the room slowly engulf me, looking as if the bed was sliding towards me. I was entirely aware that I was, in fact, the one moving towards it, but I was powerless to conceive of why this might be bad in my current state. My vision looked to be swimming, the image of the creature slowly distorting as if it were underwater. It took me far too long to realize that it wasn't my vision causing this. It was the creature moving, slowly rising up in the bed. The realization finally allowed me to tear myself from the oppressive delusion that had enveloped me, and I nearly fell to the floor as I scrambled backwards from the horrendous figure that lay in my bed. I felt the air grow unimaginably cold as its gruesome arms lurched forwards like a poorly animated stop-motion figure. The gangly limbs came inches from my torso as I flailed, throwing myself backwards in utter terror. My arms scraped against the doorframe as I staggered back into the hallway, watching the creature remain in the bed, horrible blackened limbs slowly coming to rest where they lay in mid-grab. The all-consuming stare still bore into me, and I once again saw the face as its true gruesome misrepresentation of my wife. I couldn't look at this thing any longer. Something about it distorted the way I perceived things. I felt my vision beginning to swim again in just glancing at it. But that's when I heard the shuffling. I was in the hallway. Not one, but two sets of crawling corpses reached my ears, scampering through the house, scrambling like flies. This time, I didn't even have the time to brace myself before a corpse came bursting around the corner with such great speed that it smashed against the wall, unable to make the turn. Its hands clawed and scraped along the wall as it turned to me, and by the time I reached the doorway and it stopped, it was mere feet from me. It sunk to the ground like a wilting flower, crashing down, its limbs splaying out like a spider's as another creature toppled forwards from around the corner behind it. In a choreographed effort, as they hit the floor, their heads turned upwards, and my vision lurched, suddenly plunging behind a filter of swirling darkness as my stomach dropped. My kids, they were looking at me. Horrible faces, haunting eyes, grins that showed the rotted flesh of victims in between their teeth. I shut my eyes and turned away, gripping the doorframe and feeling my stomach churn violently. It's been several hours now. I can't move from this location. There's nowhere I can make a run for it. The faces are still staring at me. Those damned faces. They don't ever move, don't blink, don't slacken their smiles. Despite my horrid company, I've never felt more alone in this house. This torture has to end. I can't bear it any longer. I'm going to start looking at my wife. No, the creature that wears a cruel imitation of my memory of her. I know what it wants, what they all want, but why torture me so? They could reach me with naught but a step of those crooked limbs. Why do they want me to go to them? I hardly care anymore. I need to be complete. I need to be with my family. They're all here now. All of them. I've missed my wife so much. I'll just lightly touch her face.